He was broken first, then rebuilt different. They ignored him when he was struggling, laughed quietly when he failed, disappeared completely when he needed them most. And when he was finally on the floor, when the rejection had piled so high he could barely breathe beneath it, when the silence of being overlooked became louder than anything he had ever heard, something happened. Pain did something dangerous to him. Not the kind of dangerous that makes noise, not the kind that announces itself, the kind that goes quiet, the kind that turns inward, the kind that a person carries alone in the dark for so long that it stops being a wound and starts becoming a weapon. This is that story. Listen carefully, because the truth inside it is not comfortable, and it was never meant to be. There is a kind of suffering that no one warns you about. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind that earns sympathy or acknowledgement or a hand reached out in your direction. The invisible kind. The kind that happens behind closed doors and behind composed faces and behind the version of yourself you present to a world that never asked how you were actually doing. He knew that kind. He had been living inside it for longer than he could precisely remember. It had started the way most quiet collapses start, gradually, with a series of moments that each seemed survivable on their own but accumulated over time into something that felt unsurvivable. A door that closed when he had believed it would open. A person who left when he had believed they would stay. A failure that came precisely when he had finally allowed himself to believe in the possibility of success. Then another and another, each one carrying the same quiet message. Not yet, not you, not enough. He had heard that message so many times that he had begun to internalize it, had begun to translate the external rejections into an internal verdict, had begun to carry the weight of other people's decisions about him as though they were objective truth rather than the limited and self-interested assessments of people who had never fully seen him to begin with. That is what prolonged rejection does. It doesn't just close doors. It convinces you that the doors were never meant for you. It doesn't just disappoint. It rewrites your understanding of what you are allowed to expect. It plants a belief in the space where confidence used to live. A small, persistent, corrosive belief that whispers the same thing every morning. Who do you think you are? And the devastating thing about that whisper is that it doesn't need anyone else to deliver it anymore. Once it takes root, you carry it yourself. You become your own most reliable critic. Your own most consistent obstacle. You wake up already arguing against yourself before the day has had a chance to offer anything. He was exhausted by his own mind. And beneath the exhaustion, deeper than the failure and the rejection and the loneliness, was a grief he had never fully named. The grief of a person who had given honestly and received calculation in return, who had been loyal to people who were loyal only to their own convenience, who had shown his real self in environments that were never safe enough to hold it, who had trusted repeatedly and sincerely and been shown repeatedly and specifically that the trust had been misplaced. Betrayal does something to a person that failure alone cannot do. Failure is impersonal. The world did not meet you. That hurts, but it is a hurt you can eventually metabolize. Betrayal is intimate. A specific person who knew you chose to harm you anyway. That hurt does not metabolize the same way. It changes the chemistry of how you move through the world. It makes you slower to open, more careful, more likely to see danger before you see possibility, more likely to wait and watch before you trust. He had become that person. Careful, watchful, quiet in ways he had never been quiet before. And for a long time, he mistook that quiet for defeat. He thought the silence inside him was the silence of a man who had given up. A man who had tried and failed enough times that the trying had finally stopped. He looked at the stillness he was living inside and interpreted it as the stillness of someone who has finished. He was wrong. But he didn't know that yet. what he didn't understand. What takes time to understand is that there are two kinds of silence. There is the silence of a person who has surrendered, and there is the silence of a person who is no longer wasting energy on things that do not matter. Those two silences feel identical from the inside, until one morning, something shifts. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel like a revelation. It feels more like a door closing very quietly somewhere inside you. The door to the room where you kept all the explanations you owed to people who never deserved them. All the apologies for existing in ways that made other people uncomfortable. All the performances of smallness designed to keep other people from feeling threatened by the space you occupied. That door closed, and something else opened. Not dramatically, not with light flooding in and music swelling, just the very quiet, very serious opening of a question he had not been willing to ask before. What if none of the things that destroyed me were the end? What if they were the instruction? Because here's what pain does that no one explains while you are inside of it. Pain strips things away. Not gently, not politely. It removes things that needed to be removed, but that comfort never would have touched. It removes the illusions you were carrying about the nature of people, the nature of the world, the nature of effort and reward and fairness. It removes the parts of your identity that were built on other people's definitions of who you were supposed to be. It removes every dependency that had been quietly weakening you, every relationship that required you to be less than yourself, every environment that punished you for growing. Every belief that was borrowed rather than earned. Pain removes all of it. And what remains, after everything false has been stripped away, is something unusually clear, unusually honest, unusually yours. He began to see himself clearly for the first time in years. Not through the lens of his failures, not through the lens of other people's assessments. Through the unmediated truth of what he actually was when stripped of every performance, every pretension, every layer accumulated in the service of fitting in. And what he saw was not what the rejections had told him he was. It was not insufficient, not inadequate, not undeserving. It was raw and damaged, and carrying more than it should have been carrying. But underneath all of that weight, it was capable of something. Something specific and serious and entirely his own. That was the beginning, not the end of the pain, but the beginning of his relationship to it changing. He stopped trying to escape the suffering. He stopped reaching for distractions. Stopped seeking out people who might temporarily fill the emptiness. Stopped trying to perform his way back to a sense of normalcy that had been built on a foundation he no longer trusted. He sat with it, all of it. He was building the record in silence, in solitude. In the daily, private, undramatic accumulation of choices that nobody was watching and nobody was rewarding. He learned to control his emotional responses, not to suppress them, not to deny that they existed, to create space between what he felt and how he acted. The pause. The brief, deliberate pause between stimulus and response, in which a person is most themselves. In which character, actual character, not performed character, is either exercised or abandoned. He exercised it. Every time someone provoked a reaction, and he chose not to give them the reaction they were looking for. Every time a situation threatened to pull him off course, and he held the course anyway. Every time the emotional weight of his past tried to dictate the behavior of his present, he paused, he chose. And in choosing, repeatedly in the small moments and the large ones, he became someone with a different relationship to his own interior. Less governed, more directed, less reactive, more intentional. This is what transforms a person. Not the single dramatic moment, the 10,000 small ones. The daily, private, inglorious practice of becoming someone different from who you were. Of choosing the harder thing so many times that it eventually becomes the natural thing. Now, there are two men in this story. Or rather, there are two paths available to every person who arrives at the place this man arrived at the bottom. In the silence. with the full weight of everything that has gone wrong sitting on their chest and no obvious reason to believe anything will go differently. They noticed. And he felt nothing particular about it. Not satisfaction in the way he would once have felt it. Not the vindication he might have once craved. Because validation had stopped being the goal so long ago that the arrival of it felt strangely irrelevant. He had not done the work to be seen. He had done the work to be someone worth seeing. And that distinction is everything. Because a man who works for recognition will stop working when the recognition is insufficient. But a man who works because of who he is becoming will continue working regardless of whether the world has caught up to what he already knows. He was not waiting for the world to catch up. He was already somewhere else. Already in the next chapter. Already working on the next version. Already further down a road that had been built entirely by him, brick by brick, in the silence that everyone else had mistaken for absence. He was never absent. He was building. And the thing about a man who builds seriously, in silence for long enough, is that eventually what he has built becomes undeniable. Not loudly, not with announcement, just there. Solid. Rooted. Immovable in the way that only things built on honest foundations can be. The people who once underestimated him now face a version of him they do not fully recognize. Not because he became something foreign to himself, but because they never actually saw who he was to begin with. They saw the surface in a difficult moment and made their permanent assessments from that single incomplete data point. He had access to more data. He knew what he was made of, and now the world is learning it too. Not from anything he said, from everything he did, and continues to do. Every day. Privately, without requiring the acknowledgement or the validation or the approval that he once let himself believe he needed. He doesn't need it. He never did. He just had to go through enough to understand that. And the going through, the actual living inside the breaking and coming out the other side with something real and earned and yours, that is not a tragedy. It is the most serious education available to a human being. It is the school that the comfortable never attend and the broken rarely graduate from. He graduated, not with ease, not without scars, not as the same person who enrolled, as something different, something that could not have been built any other way. The strongest version of a person is rarely the version that was never tested. It is the version that was tested completely. That stood in the full force of everything designed to destroy it. That found, in that confrontation, something it had not known was there. Something durable and honest and entirely its own. Something that, once found, changes everything. Because you cannot unknow what you are made of. And once you know, truly know, not as belief, but as demonstrated fact, nothing looks quite as large or as threatening as it did before. The world did not get smaller. He got bigger. Not louder. Not more visible. Not more impressive in any performed sense. Just more himself. More grounded, more capable, more real. And real is the most powerful thing a person can become. They broke him. Life broke him. And then, he did the one thing they did not expect. He used every piece. Comment. Rebuilt different.